Welcome to this Thursday edition of FreightWaves Now. I'm your host, Anthony Smith, and coming up, Michael Vincent is back with us, and he's going to give us a shipper update. But first, we're going to go to Zach Strickland with the carrier update brought to you by PowerFleet. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, and welcome to your carrier update presented by PowerFleet. I'm Zach Strickland. So, outbound tender rejection index bounced after falling below 25% for the first time in about a month's time yesterday. Again, expecting this to happen over the next week or so as we hover around this 25 to 26% range. We might dip down below 25% intermittently, but again, it's Christmas season, so that means that capacity is going to start to get a little bit more constricted the closer we get to the Christmas holiday, as people start to get bound into their areas once again, going home for home time and taking vacations. Tender volumes, however, if you look at this, the chart, the green line there, tender volumes dipped, but rejections increased. So there is an instance here where we're starting to see a little bit of a dip in demand. Demand remaining still very high on the tender volume side, but we did see a little bit of a drop in that demand side because rejection rates are included in that tender volume there. So freight volumes came down a little bit. Accepted volumes, though, remained about on par. So again, demand starting to show a little bit of a sign of slowing down a little bit. Year over year speaking, though, we're still way up. This is not necessarily a huge trend line by any means, but we do expect this volume to remain still relatively elevated throughout the holiday period. You can see going all the way back, this goes all the way back into October. We're still right on par with that. So not a lot of dramatic changes there, but if volumes do continue to fall, as they would seasonally, normally they drop from November into December as shippers do have a lot less activity going on during that period of time. Looking at the markets, though, these are the top markets in the United States. Outbound tender market share, anything over 1% volume. You can see some shifting going on in the marketplace right now. Volume's still very high out of Atlanta, Georgia. They've taken over the top spot from Ontario here in the last month or so. So freight volumes have shifted more to the East Coast slightly. You've got Los Angeles and Ontario, of course, still very high, over 7.2% of the total volume, outbound volume in the United States right now, coming out of Southern California. Dallas, Houston coming down, that's shifting down. Joliet increasing and Harrisburg increasing, as well as Elizabeth, New Jersey. So East Coast volumes starting to take a little bit more control of the overall freight market as we would anticipate this time of year, as all that freight has now moved across the country into some of these DCs closer to the population centers on the coasts. Weighted rejection index still showing a lot of red. So we still have majority of the larger markets are still coming down. They're still stabilizing right now. Capacity still getting covered. Should continue for another little bit, but we're not expecting it to decline to the point where spot rates are dropping dramatically. This is still a very strong market for carriers out there to operate on the spot market with, because we do still have rejection rates in the country over 25%. Looking at some of the hottest markets week over week, we've got Detroit, Michigan, of all places. Ontario showing up with a 2.4. Not a significant increase by any means, but still, that's part of that kind of fluctuation, that waiver that we encounter throughout these more, I wouldn't call it, well, stable times, but not as much volatility. Looking down here in the bottom right, though, you can see these are the biggest drops in the market here over the last bit. St. Louis, Elizabeth, Allentown, Harrisburg. Capacity is getting covered a lot more in these markets. Looking at the chart of the outbound tender rejection index for three of these markets, St. Louis, Elizabeth, and Allentown, you can see all of them have a similar pattern there at the end, where it's a huge drop in the last week or so with tender rejection rates. This is still the recovery from that Thanksgiving period. So nothing to be overly concerned about. You can still see, if you draw a line from where those are, historically speaking, we're still about at the bottom end of where we are, where we've been over the last 3 months, since about late August. So market's still very active. We are just correcting off of this Thanksgiving holiday still, but it looks like it might have found a floor for now. And that'll do it for today's carrier update.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.
Hello, welcome to your shipper update. I'm Michael Vincent on this beautiful Thursday morning. Let's jump into it here. Looking at the outbound tender volume index across the nation, we're seeing a drop here over the last few days, down to 15,436. As we spoke about this before, this is typically what we see during this time of year leading into the Christmas and New Year's as shipments start to reduce a little bit. You can see the downward trend over the last 2 years, 2019 in the orange, and the green there is 2018. So nothing that we wouldn't expect during this time right now, but definitely shipments coming down off of that peak that we saw right before Thanksgiving there, and right after the rebound after that holiday as well, starting to dwindle down a little bit as we would expect. If we look at the outbound tender rejects, we see that it has actually ticked back up above 25 above 25 to 25.19, excuse me. And it's definitely much elevated over the last few years, as we've seen for quite some time now. So the constraint of capacity, the ability to get capacity to move your shipments is still very, very difficult to do right now. It's very, very high. And we don't expect that to change. As we move through this season, typically the volumes start to come down, but drivers starting to come offline going into the holidays, and the change in origin of these shipments means that OTRI, or the tender rejections, will still have upward pressure and move up. I would think it's going to kind of oscillate there for a little bit and then start to peak as we get closer to Christmas and New Year's. Moving forward, looking at the outbound tender rejections by mode, we can see that reefer has been coming down since mid to latter half of November. In the orange there. Van is what has seen the uptick in the last day there, coming up to 25.21. So your dry van tender rejects is what's driving that uptick right now. Expect that to continue, as I said before, through the holiday season. If we move forward and look at the outbound tender reject and outbound tender volume map, the blue is the outbound tender rejects and the height is the volume. We can see that we're shifting here East Coast. As Zach said, these distribution areas here really coming on strong with a lot of volume coming out of those. And you can see the fluctuations in the outbound tender rejects here. Harrisburg up a little bit, and consequently upstate New York, Erie, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, and even Columbus there in pretty good tight capacity areas. What this means on rates, still upward pressure. Over on the left-hand side here, the OTRI and the magenta here, you can see that the outbound tender rejects took this bump up as volumes came down here in the blue. Pressure on rates is still up across all modes. A little flat on the refrigerated, but van at 3.07. If we move forward a little bit, looking at Columbus, Ohio, we see that Columbus, Ohio here on the right-hand side, their outbound tender volume has dropped and their inbound tender volume has increased. They have crossed lines right here, meaning that capacity is loosening a little bit in that market as inbound starts to come in there and outbound starts to drop. If we look at Harrisburg, we see the opposite. You see their outbound tender volume pretty flat right there at 519, inbound dropping dramatically down to 4.67 as capacity starts to tighten in that market. I'm Mike Vincent. That'll do it for your shipper update.
And that's going to do it for this Thursday edition of FreightWaves Now. As always, you can check out all of our content on all your favorite streaming platforms, including Apple TV. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.